What's going on, guys? It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. This one I'm going to be doing a mock auction draft on the ESPN platform. I did one a little bit earlier in the off season, but you guys have requested that I do another one here and sort of make it a little bit more up to date. So I figured I'd put one of these out here for you guys. This will be in a 12-team PPR league with a pretty standard roster: one quarterback, two running back, two wide receiver, one tight end, a flex, and then we've got 7 bench spots here. So also of note, we're operating with a $200 budget. So generally fun to do all these mock drafts. We're also getting towards that point in the off season where you can actually find 11 other people that are looking to do a mock draft. So you get a lot more variability, a lot less computers. It makes it a little bit more realistic and adds some variance to it, which makes it really fun. So we're really getting into the heat of the off season. Really, we're already into August. It's gonna be draft season before we know it. Most of you guys will probably be drafting in late August. You probably got like a 3-4 week window to really get prepped for all your drafts. And I think mock drafting is one of the best ways to do that. It really helps you prepare for a bunch of different scenarios that can come up during your draft, really know how you want to approach each thing, lets you try out different builds and see how you like them. You can generally find maybe you don't like taking a high-end quarterback, or maybe you do. It's just kind of like fun to go into these drafts and try out different things and then see how it turns out, and then you can sort of see which rosters you like the most afterwards. So I do also recommend that. I personally keep a log of every single mock draft I do. I log the roster just so I can go back and look at them later. It's just a fun way to do that. My bad, I'll mute this. I know I had the volume on at one point earlier on a mock auction I did on Yahoo earlier, so I won't let you guys hear that this time. So pretty standard here. We see Justin Jefferson get nominated right away. Obviously, Justin Jefferson's a fantastic player. I have no problem with him being the first player off boards. I just generally find from my experience with all my mock drafting that I don't really like how my rosters turn out when I spend that much to get Justin Jefferson. I feel like it really handicaps me in terms of my abilities to get guys that I want later on, especially because we see what's happening right here happen very often. We see these top tier guys go for even more than their pre-draft value. Normally, I've seen Justin Jefferson on ESPN go in for around $75. This looks about right. I've seen him go for $74. That's just a little bit too rich for me given how much value you can get later on at the wide receiver position, so I'm okay to pass up that top tier here. So next we've got Jamar Chase. I think Jamar Chase here is a pretty clear wide receiver 2 overall now, especially with what we've seen happen with Cooper Kupp just yesterday. I'm recording this on August 2nd, so we saw Cooper Kupp leave practice yesterday with a hamstring injury. It says he's going to be out a couple weeks. We should know more here, so maybe by the time you're watching this, we have an update on that. But my experience is generally don't draft players, especially high-end players that are already dealing with injury. Injuries are going to find you throughout the course of the regular season, so I don't really want to go chasing injuries or injured players during my draft because it's just going to be a headache throughout the course of the season. If Cooper Kupp ends up busting and you spend this kind of capital on him, you're going to lose your league. It's really hard to bounce back for spending high-end first-round draft capital on a player that ends up being a complete bust, and I think that is in the range of outcomes for Cooper Kupp this season. Obviously, it's also possible that he ends up being the wide receiver 1 overall, but it's just a little bit too scary for me. The re-injury rate is actually pretty high for hamstring injuries. That re-injury rate is doubled when a player is over the age of 28. Cooper Kupp is, so that's a little scary. We kind of saw what happened with Keenan Allen last season. He tweaked his hamstring earlier in the season, tried to come back, tweaked it again, and he was out several more weeks, and we didn't really get to see him until like week 12, week 13, so I just think we could be up against something like that with Cooper Kupp this season, and that sort of fear just makes me too scared to take him early in the first round right now. So we've yet to really bid on anyone. These guys are like obviously great players in Jefferson, Chase, and Eckler. It's just that I have found in general that buying all 3 of these guys ends up being just having a negative impact in terms of how I view my teams after building out the complete roster. I think there are really good values you can get later on. Obviously, each of these guys comes at a price that I'm more than happy to buy them for, but none of these guys have gone for a significant value. None of them have really just made it so that I could justify spending that amount on them and really feel good about how I'm going to be able to build up the rest of my roster. So one thing I have been sort of interested in trying out, I haven't really done a Kelce build in an auction draft on ESPN. I've done a couple, but I haven't done too many of those. So if Kelce goes for a reasonable price, I think I will try doing that. I've sort of talked myself out in general of spending that kind of capital on Kelce because I generally find that I can get a much better value on Mark Andrews later. But I think a lot of you guys are interested. A lot of you guys might be interested to see how a build with paying up for Travis Kelce looks. So if Travis Kelce goes for a reasonable amount here, I'm more than willing to do that. So we'll see how that goes out. If he gets out of hand, I'm not going to overpay for him, but I would be interested in seeing how I can build out a team like that. I think you guys might find that interesting as well. So We saw Bijan go for 60. I actually think that's about right. I think Bijan's got a legitimate shot to be the running back one overall this season. I don't have it ranked that way. I think he's my RB5 or my RB6 in my rankings, but the upside's clearly there. I have no problem taking him as high as the RB. I mean, if you want to take him as the RB1, go ahead. I totally get it. So I think I totally understand the upside case for Bijan. So really, I'm okay with about any draft capital you want to spend on him. Here we're seeing Cooper Kupp go for a little bit under his pre-draft value. That makes a lot of sense. I think that the pre-draft value just hasn't fully adjusted to the injury news yet. ESPN sort of adjusts their pre-draft values. It seems like on a weekly basis. It almost feels like it happens every Tuesday. So um, we'll see what happens there. So I did say I wanted to see what I could do with a Kelce build here. If it gets out of hand, I'm not going to be a part of it, but I'll go up to like 70 just to see what it looks like. Okay, I'm not going to do a Kelce build here. It's just going to be too detrimental to our roster to overpay here. I'm not generally pro Kelce build anyway. I'm interested in seeing how it would play out, but I'm not going to just scrap my entire roster to make it happen here. And look at what we're seeing. We're seeing Travis Kelce get way out of hand here. He's now going for $73. That's effectively the same amount that we saw Justin Jefferson go, 74. So at this point, it's the equivalent of taking Travis Kelce with the number one overall pick in a draft. You just can't do that. I would highly recommend not spending this much on Travis Kelce. Obviously, Travis Kelce's elite, but I think that you can get a much better value on Mark Andrews later. So I think at his value, it's fine if you really want to do it, if you want to commit to it. But I just can't find myself paying this kind of draft capital for a guy that he is 34. He will probably be the tight end one, but it's just not something I can do. I can't pay that much for him. So then we see Tyreek Hill get nominated. I think Tyreek Hill is actually a perfectly good value right now. I think that I have no problem spending. I mean, in most redraft leagues, I would take him ahead of Travis Kelce, especially in a PPR format, which this is. If I can get him for 56, I think that's a very quality value here. Um, but by no means a requirement. Now that we have missed out on Kelce, though, something that I find that I almost really want to pencil into most of my rosters is getting Mark Andrews. As you can see, he's $21 on ESPN. That's just robbery, given that. I mean, would you rather have Mark Andrews for 21 or Travis Kelce for 76? For me, the answer is pretty obvious. So maybe some of you guys might not have the same stance there, but I think that Mark Andrews is a lock to be a top two tight end this season, assuming the Ravens' offense is competent and Mark Andrews and Lamar stay healthy. So assuming health, I think Mark Andrews is one of the best values in the draft right now, and only spending $21 on him just feels like a really great value right now. Saquon's another guy I just don't find myself drafting too much of. He actually did slow down quite a bit towards the second half of last season. I still think he's a great player. I still think he's going to have a really solid season, but um, I just don't really find myself wanting to spend that much on him. I think that there's a world that exists this season where he ends up being more of like a low end running back one, a guy that needs touchdowns to really truly be an elite performer. And I just think that we could see this Giants offense take a step back this season. So I don't find myself buying too much of Saquon either, even though I do actually have him on one of my dynasty teams, which um, I'm still rooting for him. Although he is sort of a guy, if we want to talk about dynasty for a little quick second, I would be looking to move off of Saquon right now. Who knows where he's going to be next season? He's getting up there in age. You probably got maybe a 1 or 2 year window left out of Saquon. So unless you're a contender, I would definitely be trying to move off of Saquon right now. Although I would prefer the value on Saquon for 55 compared to Derrick Henry for 59. So if that's the case, I guess take Saquon here. Devontae Adams is a guy that I've sort of talked myself into. I really wasn't all that in on him from a I didn't find myself drafting him that often, and I went back and looked at my rankings, and he came out as like my wide receiver 3 when I did all my projections. He's just a really good player. It almost doesn't matter who his quarterback is. I'm not willing to overpay for him, but like I think you could make an argument for him sliding into that tier 1 of wide receiver with the Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chases of the world. Like, he might be the most talented wide receiver in the NFL. Obviously, he's got a quarterback issue in Jimmy Garoppolo, but that's not much of a downgrade from Derek Carr if it is one. He was still the wide receiver 3 overall last season with Derek Carr, and I mean, the dude's just really good. He's going to get open all the time, and he's just a great player. So now that it's our turn, we're going to nominate another player we don't want, especially early on. It's too early to be nominating players that we're interested in. I just want to get rid of people's draft capital as much as possible here. I just find myself pretty much avoiding Jonathan Taylor. Again, I'm just pretty risk averse early on in these first couple rounds. I go by the saying that in the first round and the second round, you can't really win your draft, but you really can lose it. If you draft a player that's going to be a straight out bust in the first or second round, you're probably done. I mean, you can overcome it, but it's really hard. So guys with this much risk profile built into them, like Jonathan Taylor, a guy that who knows what's going to happen. He might not even play week one. He's apparently dealing with a back injury. He's still recovering from his ankle injury last season. There's just a lot of question marks surrounding him, and I just don't want to spend that much draft capital on a guy that I have serious concerns about. Stephon Diggs is a guy that I would have been interested in here, but again, he zoomed right past that pre-draft value. I think 55 is actually a pretty reasonable price tag for him, but we're early on enough in the draft that I still want to be a little bit patient. I want to try and get values. There's several guys coming up here that I'm really interested in, like Nick Chubb's a guy that I find myself leaving almost all of my drafts with, and I think it just makes a lot of sense to do that. I think he's one of the best values at the running back position right now, especially in this first, second round area. So I find myself drafting Nick Chubb a ton. There are other tier 1 wide receivers I'm interested in, A.J. Brown being one of them. I actually had Chris Olave ranked one spot ahead of A.J. Brown, but I think A.J. Brown's a really solid wide receiver 1, coming as my wide receiver 9 in my projections. Chris Olave to me is one of the best values on the ESPN platform, so I find myself drafting him in almost every mock draft I do on ESPN. But it's really great if I can make Chris Olave my wide receiver 2, not my wide receiver 1. Again, though, I'm not going to overpay here. No need for me to drastically overpay for a player when there's so many other tier 1 wide receiver, tier 2 wide receivers left on the board. Looking at the wide receivers left, there's still CD, Amon-Ra, and technically Chris Olave are in my tier 3 of wide receivers, so or tier 2 of wide receivers. So there are plenty of wide receivers left that I'm really comfortable with leaving as my wide receiver 1. I'm not going to put myself in a spot where I'm going to overpay for a guy, even though I do think that A.J. Brown could be a really solid player this season. He's obviously going to be a fantastic asset. CeeDee Lamb, though, it's a guy we want. We've got plenty of draft capital left, so I do want to make sure that we try and get either 2 really good running backs or 1 really good receiver to go with Chris Olave, who we're going to pretty much force onto our roster. Really trying to find one of these wide receivers we can get a value on, because I don't really view guys like CD, A.J. Brown, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, those guys. I view them all very similarly. So there we go. That's why we were patient. Getting CeeDee Lamb for 48 to me is just a much better value than getting a guy like Stephon Diggs for 56, getting Devontae Adams for 56. So that's another example where it really does make sense to put your rankings into tiers. Me knowing that, okay, I've got CeeDee Lamb in the same tier as those guys that are going ahead of him. Let's just wait until we get the best value here. No need to force a guy onto our roster just because we're getting worried that we're going to run out. And it's just a good way to go about things, understanding that I don't feel like I got any worse by letting A.J. Brown slip, but then getting CeeDee Lamb. So made sense there, save myself a couple dollars that I'm going to be able to use down the line and really give myself some more depth. So $3 might not sound like a lot, but when you get towards the end of your draft, it really can be a huge deal. So now obviously there's a flip side of that where maybe I wait too long and then I miss out on that whole tier of player, and then my roster is actually hurting because I was too patient. So you got to be careful there. I generally find myself trying to avoid waiting until it's the last player in a tier. So like Amon-Ra would have been the last commonly ranked high-end wide receiver left. I guess Garrett Wilson as well. A little bit lower than ADP on Garrett Wilson, but I wouldn't have wanted to wait till there was just one of them left to really start getting involved in the bidding, because then I could find myself in a situation where maybe I've decided that I really do need to get that tier of a wide receiver on my roster, but there's only one left, so then I'm going to actually force myself to overpay. And sometimes it's what you have to do, but it's better to not put yourself in those spots and maybe just get one a little bit earlier. Garrett Wilson is really interesting. I do think that he's got a legitimate shot to finish as a top 5 wide receiver this season. He's clearly an elite talent, but there's also the whole situation. He's got a new quarterback. Aaron Rodgers is familiar with Allen Lazard. This is going to be a probably run-first, defense-first team, slow-paced offense. It's hard to really know what to expect out of that team. I think that Garrett Wilson finishing as like a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 is probably the most likely outcome, but obviously this guy's the limit for him, and I've got no problem if you really want to spend up. Now, we did see Amon-Ra go for 44. In hindsight, I would have rather had Amon-Ra for 44 than CeeDee Lamb for 48. So that's an example where, okay, maybe I could have waited, but you never really know how that's going to play out. You don't want to continue to pass on values just to hope that you're going to get an even better one. Obviously, you're not ever going to have a perfect draft. You're going to have to draft players that are a little bit higher than maybe another player in the same tier went for, but that's okay. Just make sure that you're taking value when it presents itself. Don't put yourself in awkward spots where you feel like you're doing things you don't want to just because you have to. So right here is an interesting thing. We saw Team Rogers actually nominate Keenan Allen. This is actually one of the things I don't recommend doing, especially this early on in the draft. Team Rogers very clearly wanted Keenan Allen on his roster. He nominated him so that he could get him now, but what you see because he did that is everybody else in this draft still has plenty of draft capital left. They've all got tons of money to spend. So you're almost always going to see those guys that are nominated this early go for above ADP. There's a flip side of that, in that maybe it's a guy that's really going to alter your draft strategy. For example, like I'm pretty confident that I really want to get Mark Andrews here in a second. I maybe want to be cognizant of that, and I could nominate Mark Andrews with my next pick so that I can know, okay, if Mark Andrews is going to get out of hand, get too expensive, then I know, okay, I have that extra money. I can use it to better my roster everywhere else. So there's a give and take there where it makes sense to nominate players if they're going to be really influential in your decision-making process throughout the draft. It helps to have that information whether or not you're going to get them. But just understand that if you do nominate a player ahead of time, you're probably going to overpay by just a little bit. While I was talking there, I did go buy Nick Chubb for $45. To me, that's just an absolute steal. You look at other running backs going around him here. Josh Jacobs is 45, Saquon's 55, Derrick Henry's 59, Bijan's 60, McCaffrey's 70, Eckler's 70. I think Nick Chubb's just very clearly the best value out of all those guys. I think he's got a legitimate shot to be the running back one, and he really just doesn't cost you all that much. Obviously, $45 is by no means cheap, but for the production you're going to get out of him, I think he's just an absolute steal. Breece Hall is an interesting player as well. I think we should probably expect to see his pre-draft value and his ADP drop here pretty soon. I do expect the Jets to add Dalvin Cook, and it is a little surprising that Dalvin Cook didn't sign over this past weekend, so maybe that means they're not going to, but I think the fact that they're looking this heavily into him is a pretty strong indication that he's not as healthy as maybe we'd hope he'd be. It's just really hard for players to come off of torn ACLs and put up really elite performances the following season. Adrian Peterson's like the lone exception to that rule, so I find myself out on Breece Hall this season. I think he's a really good player. I'm still in on Dynasty, but I just think it's going to be a really tough season for him. The Jets have a really tough opening season schedule. They could be a team that's honestly starting the season like 2-6, 3-7, and it's just going to be hard for a running back on that kind of team coming off an injury to really put up elite numbers early on in the season. Breece Hall to me on ESPN is actually one of the more overpriced players. I have him buried in my rankings. It was like my running back 23. He's currently going for upwards of like $38, $40 in most drafts. To me, that's just way too much. I think that I would much rather have guys that are way cheaper. Running backs that are cheaper that I'd prefer over ETN include like, I think Jahmyr Gibbs is a better purchase. I think Miles Sanders is better. I honestly think David Montgomery is better this season. Ramondre is much better. There's just a lot of better values here. I don't find myself drafting ETN at all, and I can't find any reason to justify that high of a price tag. We saw Patrick Mahomes go for 41. That's pretty standard. It feels like generally the tier 1 quarterbacks you're going to see go for around like 18 to 20% of your auction budget in most drafts. So that puts these guys going from like $36 to $40. It's pretty typical. I generally find that, I mean, they're all, to me, very similar. I personally have Jalen Hurts ranked the highest, so he's generally the best value for me if you do want to approach getting one of those three. But I generally just find that, especially on the ESPN platform, there's a pretty huge drop-off in cost to these guys after that tier. And I do agree that there's obviously there's a production dip going from these three to the next tier of guys, but I've got Justin Herbert as my quarterback 4. He's currently coming off the board as the quarterback 7. He's $30 cheaper than the tier 1 quarterbacks, so he tends to be the guy that I find myself drafting the most of on ESPN. I will note that in most of your home leagues that you'll do, and personally in my home leagues as well, I do find that these higher end quarterbacks, or even like most of the quarterbacks, they just go for more expensive than what you see here. I think that sort of goes hand in hand with these are just names that everybody knows, even if they're not as committed to fantasy as maybe some of us are. Obviously, if you're watching this video, you're taking fantasy football pretty seriously. Um, and the league mates in your home leagues might not be taking it as seriously. So when they see a guy that they know, they're more comfortable spending that much on him. Um, that's just sort of something I've observed. I went back and looked at my last year's my last year's auction draft in my home league. Like the top 6, 7 quarterbacks all went for about $20, not just the top tier. I think that's just something that happens. You have teams that either end up with too much money and they really just want to pencil in getting the best quarterback that they can, or you have teams that they just aren't as familiar with a lot of their names and they'll find themselves overpaying. So just be ready for that in your home leagues, your less experienced leagues. I do expect to see this quarterbacks go for more expensive, and the lower tier quarterbacks go for more expensive than what you'd see here. Jahmyr Gibbs is a guy that's really interesting to me. I think he's absolutely got the potential to be a running back one this season. I actually have no problem drafting both him and David Montgomery. Um, if you watched my hot takes video earlier that I put out a couple weeks ago, I actually suggested that David Montgomery might outscore Jahmyr Gibbs in fantasy this season. I still almost stand by that. I think that David Montgomery is going to get the meaningful goal line work. I think they're both going to catch a decent number of passes. Obviously, I do think David Montgomery is going to outtouch Jahmyr Gibbs just because Gibbs is very small. I don't think he can handle a true workhorse workload, but Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be super efficient. I think he's perfectly fine draft pick, and especially if he's your running back too, I really have no problem with that. And he's going to have some serious spike weeks as well. So Gibbs, I was not trying to hate on him at all when I suggested that Montgomery might outscore him. I just think that David Montgomery is one of the better values in drafts right now. And right here, we're going to see Jalen Hurts go for $33. That's exactly to me why it makes sense that if you want to draft one of the top three, draft Jalen Hurts. We saw Josh Allen and Mahomes each go for 40. Jalen Hurts went for 33. I personally have Jalen Hurts ranked ahead of the two. So if you're going to draft one of these guys, just take Jalen Hurts. Maybe you have him ranked a little bit lower, but you're going to save $10, and I think you're going to get at least very similar production than what you're going to get out of the other two. So that's just what makes the most sense to me. I've got no problem just taking Jalen Hurts and being really happy that you've got a tier one quarterback here. Metcalf's a guy I find myself not really drafting much of. I just think that obviously he's a really talented player. I think the Seahawks offense is going to be pretty good again this season, but the price tag just doesn't make sense to me. I don't think that you can really make a strong case that he's the locked and loaded wide receiver one on this team. We saw Tyler Lockett actually outscore him in fantasy last season. They just spent their first round draft pick this season on Jackson Smith and Jigba, the first wide receiver off the board. And like I still would project DK Metcalf to finish as the wide receiver one on this team, but the fact that you could make an argument that there are potentially two other wide receivers on the roster that could finish ahead of DK Metcalf, I'm not projecting that. I think JSN's pretty clearly going to finish as the three here, but he just ends up being by far the worst value of all the Seahawk wide receivers. If you can get Tyler Lockett for $8 on ESPN compared to Metcalf for 30, that just seems like a steal. If you can get JSN for $4, that just seems like a much better value, even though I think JSN's probably going to start slow. Yeah, Metcalf I just find to be a bad value right now. He's just don't want to spend that much on a Seahawks wide receiver that might not even be the true number one there. I did almost put my name in the hat there on Devonta Smith. I think Devonta Smith's actually going to be a really solid wide receiver. I've got him ranked as my wide receiver 12 in PPR this season. I think he's just really solid. I've got no problem with that. Joe Mixon here, I actually have not found myself drafting much of Joe Mixon at all, but at $23, I had to put my name in the hat there. I'm not going to do it because I want to be able to save money later for a couple running backs that I think I have ranked significantly ahead of ADP, or guys that I think are really good values, guys like David Montgomery, who I've talked about. We actually saw, if you take a look at the running back values, James Conner's recently been bumped up in terms of his pre-draft value on ESPN. He was trading at around like $10 for most of the offseason. We've seen him bump up to 17. That's a pretty significant jump. It puts him up right next to like Miles Sanders. Now I think Miles Sanders is a better value there. So I think that James Conner is he's not off my draft boards by any means, but the value is just not as there as it was for me a little bit earlier. Now I'm much more in on drafting guys like David Montgomery for 5. Cam Akers is interesting now. Alexander Madison's okay. So now we're up here. Another player that I'm pretty just significantly below ADP on, Damian. I believe I've got Dameon Pierce ranked as my running back 37 right now. That's just It might be too low. I've looked at it several times. I just really can't do much to bump him up in my projections. I'm projecting this Texans offense to be just generally really bad, and I don't think that's an unreasonable prediction. They've got a rookie quarterback. They don't really have very talented skill position players. It's just going to be a rough season for the Texans offense. So you're going to have Dameon Pierce being a bruising running back, getting first and second down work, getting goal line work, and a bad offense. So the only way he really outperforms his ADP is if he just has a really fluky touchdown season. I'm going to bid here on Aaron Jones. Okay, never mind. Actually, I'll still bid 21 on Aaron Jones. Um, okay. Yeah, I don't want to bid too much on Aaron Jones here, but if you can get Aaron Jones, even for 23, I think that's totally fine. He's not a guy I find myself drafting a ton of, but I'm a little bit ahead of ADP on him. Getting him at a value here. He's going to slot in right really nicely as my running back too. I'm not going to go up to 25 here. It's just a little bit much because there's so many running backs left that I think are really good values. But Aaron Jones is a perfectly fine value. I was very interested there. I could have happily paid 25 for him, and I would have been okay, especially if I knew I wasn't going to get guys later. But I want to leave some room for players I want to get later, and also there's guys that I'm much more sold on, guys like I really want to get Mark Andrews and Chris Olave here. So I want to make sure I've got money to do that. We've still got plenty of budget left, $107. Getting those two guys is going to make us feel really good. We're going to have two really top-tier wide receivers, truly elite tight end, truly elite running back, and Nick Chubb. So that's generally how I like to build things out here. So we'll see if I can make it happen, but I think that's what we're looking for here. So here we go, Chris Olave. He's just the guy that I find myself drafting pretty much everywhere. I've got him ranked inside my top 8. I think he's going to be a stud this season. He's cheap on ESPN. He's cheap on Sleeper, too. I did a mock draft over there. He's $22 on Sleeper, so that's just a steal. I'd be shocked if I get him at a value here. I'm almost never able to get him at a value, but if I can get Olave for 20, wow. Wow, what a steal. Okay, so now we've got a ton of extra money to play with. That's going to allow us to do a lot with our roster here going forward. Because we only need to fill one more wide receiver. I like to say you should budget $2 for each of your bench spots, one for your kicker and defense. So I only need to budget $16 for my bench and my kicker and defense, meaning that I've got $71 to spend on my tight end, my RB2, and my quarterback. Obviously, that's really nice. Oh, and my flex. So we've got 4 spots we need to fill here. With $71. I mean, we could spend about $18 a player. Obviously, we're going to spend around 10 on our quarterback here. At the wide receiver position, I'm not super hot and bothered for any of these guys, so I actually find myself just going one tier lower. I like, honestly, all 3 of these guys here. Terry McLaurin, Mike Williams, Marquise Brown, and Tyler Lockett, and Ayuk. This tends to be a range that I find myself drafting a lot of wide receivers in. Really good values there, but they're going to be cheap. So what it's telling me right now is that I can spend up on my next running back. I am probably going to end up drafting Miles Sanders. I've got him ranked the highest of everyone left. $18 to me is perfectly okay. I don't think he's as good of a value as a guy like David Montgomery, but because we have so much money left, it just makes the most sense. He'll probably slot in really nicely as our running back 2 here. Debo's a guy I find myself drafting almost none of. I just think that you can make a real strong case that Brandon Ayuk's the wide receiver 1 in that team, and I think that it's going to be an offense that's going to spread the ball around so much that you're not really going to know who's going to be the breakout performer week to week. So it's sort of like a Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf situation where Debo is probably the one, but given that he just costs so much more than the presumed number 2 in Ayuk or Lockett, it just makes much more sense for me to wait a little bit later and get those guys for a very significant discount. I'm not super high on Amari Cooper, but $19 is perfectly fine. I think he's going to be a really solid wide receiver 2 this season. I was actually surprised when I was looking at my projections how high I have him ranked. I think he's like my wide receiver 16 in my projections. I thought I would actually have him lower than that because I haven't drafted him a ton, but I think he's going to be good this season. He's clearly going to be the number 1 wide receiver in Cleveland. Deshaun Watson should be better than he was in last season. I expect him to be somewhere in between where he was last season and back when he was in Houston. So we could see him be like a fringe top 10 kind of passer, see him throw for over 4,000 yards this year, and that'd be certainly enough to support Amari Cooper this season, and that'd be really good for Amari Cooper's fantasy outlook this year. And again, Amari Cooper looked really good last season. I don't think he's anywhere near getting washed. I think he's perfectly talented. He's going to be perfectly competent again this season. He's definitely good enough to be a number one wide receiver in the NFL, and I've got no problem drafting him to be your number two. Lamar's a guy I just find myself not drafting much of. I'm not a very strong believer in his ability to really just stay healthy for the course of a whole season. I find that, it's just not the kind of guy that I really want to be spending too much draft capital on a quarterback that's got that many question marks. I feel like I need to draft a second quarterback if I have Lamar, and that's just, it feels gross, so I don't find myself drafting much of him. Mark Andrews will be on our roster. We've got the extra money because we saved it getting Chris Olave. I think Mark Andrews is just a very, very significant positional advantage. If you watch my tight end tier video, I've got Kelce in tier 1, Mark Andrews alone in tier 2, and then we get into tier 3 with the guys like Dallas Goedert and TJ Hawkinson. Again, we got Mark Andrews at a discount too. That's fantastic. We've got plenty of extra money here. Going off of our rankings, we do have Jerry Jeudy actually a little bit below the other guys here. I've got Jerry Jeudy ranked behind guys like Marquise Brown, so it doesn't make sense for me to spend up here even though we've got the money to afford him. I want to make sure that we can get our running back too, make sure we can get the quarterback we want here in Justin Herbert. And obviously we still want to fill our flex with the best wide receiver available. So Miles Sanders is going to come to this team here. I'm still going to be pretty adamant about getting David Montgomery to be our running back 3 off the bench. Generally, having spent this much capital on the running back position, I'm going to be really comfortable taking probably just 4 total running backs on this team. I find that you get way better values at the wide receiver position. There's generally more that presents itself on waivers in the running back position throughout the course of the season as well. You can just find backups for teams that got hurt. Again, another value. We got Miles Sanders for 16. So we've got a ton of money to play with here. Let's just get it out of the way. Let's get our quarterback. I want to be able to see how much money we're going to have left to budget. I have the extra money that I'm basically going to force Justin Herbert onto my roster. I think he's just a lock to be a top five quarterback this season. If you watch my hot takes video again, he's a guy that I predicted to finish as the quarterback 1 overall this season. I think you could just see a really historic season from Justin Herbert, a season where he throws for 5,000 yards, 50 touchdowns. Certainly possible this year, and I really want that on my roster if it happens. Really solid draft going so far right now. We've got 2 top-tier wide receivers, a really great quarterback, 2 good running backs, top-tier tight end as well. Got plenty of draft capital left as well. I've got $42 to play with. We've got, like I say, budget 2 for your bench spots, 1 for each your kicker and defense. That means technically we could spend up to 26 on our bench spot. We're not going to do that, so we're going to have a little bit more depth, so maybe we could have been a little bit more aggressive, but I'm really happy with how it played out. That's generally how I like to play things out, is I want to make sure that I get the guys I really want in my starting lineup, and then if I happen to get them for cheaper than I was expecting, then that's okay. It just means that I get a deeper team than I was planning to have, and that's certainly not a problem, especially if it didn't come at the cost of getting the guys that I want. I truly did get the guys that I wanted in this draft. I got the top-tier tight end. I got Olave, another tier 2 wide receiver. Got Nick Chubb, who I think is a tier 1 running back. Miles Sanders, I think, could be a running back 1 this season. Herbert's going to be fantastic. So I really like how this draft went so far. I think we're in really good shape and really poised to have a really strong team here. TJ Hawkinson's a really interesting one because after being traded to the Minnesota Vikings last season, he was actually on pace to lead the entire tight end position across the NFL in targets. That was his pace after being traded. So there's a case to be made that he does have like tight end 1 overall upside. It's going to be a Vikings offense that's going to throw the ball a ton this season. Obviously, they added Jordan Addison, but that just means to me they're going to pass even more than they did last year, having lost Dalvin Cook, added Addison. They're going to be a really pass-heavy, really good offense. So Hawkinson's perfectly fine for me. I've got him ranked my tight end 4, just 1 spot behind consensus because I'm super high on Dallas Goedert this season. But Hawkinson's for 14 is a completely reasonable value. I just don't find myself drafting much of him because you can get Dallas Goedert for like $6. So on ESPN, to me, it just doesn't make much sense to pay up for Hawkinson because Goddard's a better value later on. Another thing I'll point out is normally in your PPR formats, you're going to be probably looking to fill your flex position with a wide receiver. I think that a lot of people don't really think about um, the fact that you do get to choose which position you're going to play in your flex, basically. And generally what you see is after about the top 20 at the position, so around like the 20th running back, 20th wide receiver, they score a very similar amount of points. But once you get beyond that, once you get in towards that flex territory, wide receivers, especially in PPR formats, are going to score far more points than the running back position. Albeit a little bit more inconsistently. Running backs tend to be a little bit more consistent than wide receivers because their volume is more guaranteed. But in your flex spot, you probably want the more upside, the more higher average production out of it. So I tend to lean towards playing a wide receiver in my flex. Given that we've got the money to basically pick any guy we want here, I'm going to be leaning towards Marquise Brown. He's the highest in my rankings, but a guy like Mike Williams is a perfectly good flex. Terry McLaurin's a guy that I've been rising on lately. I had him significantly lower in my rankings just about a week ago, actually, and I went ahead and adjusted some things for him. I made him a little bit more efficient. I adjusted the completion percentage on targets towards Terry McLaurin. I gave him like a 2% bump to target share. I also gave Dotson a bit of a bump as well. Just took a little bit of the target share away from the ancillary pieces there and moved them both up in my rankings. I think this is going to be an offense that's just really going to funnel the entire offense through those two. I think Terry McLaurin is going to be a really solid wide receiver 3 this season. I've got him ranked as my wide receiver 25, I believe now, so just right outside the top 24, but he's going to be really good. He's a really talented player. If he's your wide receiver 3, I think it's really solid, and I actually don't mind drafting him, which is weird because I thought I was significantly below consensus on him. DJ Moore is a guy that I'm significantly below consensus on. I don't see it for the Bears. Justin Fields has just been absolutely brutal throwing the ball each of the last 2 seasons. Maybe he takes a huge leap forward now that he's added DJ Moore. Apparently, there are good reports about Chase Claypool in camp this season, but I just don't buy it. I don't want to be left holding the bag with another DJ Moore season where he's open all the time and just can't get good targets thrown to him. So it's just not a guy that I'm really targeting. I just don't think the upside is really there. And as much as people want to hype it up, I mean, he's actually cheaper in drafts this season than he was last year. So despite all the hype surrounding him, he's actually, like, it seems like people know the way they feel about it really is that he's probably going to be worse than he's been in Carolina. That's really sad, but that seems to be what people are actually expecting, despite the fact that there's a lot more hype around him, just given the presumed hope of better performance. So I'm actually going to buy Terry McLaurin here if I can get him for 12. He's perfectly fine value. I like him as my wide receiver 3. I don't have any problem. I'll still have plenty of money left. I can still go get a Marquise Brown if I want, or a Mike Williams. I'll be bidding on both of them. Whichever one comes in at a reasonable value, I'll probably take. Having these guys, like, I want to have 2 guys that I can alternate as my flex. Mike Williams is a guy that he's kind of the perfect flex play because he's just so boom or bust that you play him in your flex spot, and if he goes off, you're pretty much unbeatable. If he has a bad game while he was your flex, you can probably work to overcome it. So if I really like having him in my flex, I'm not going to overpay here, though, because I actually do have Marquise Brown ranked a little bit higher in my rankings. I think Marquise Brown's going to have a really good season this season, so I'm not going to overpay when Marquise Brown is still on the board. Darren Waller is another guy that I find myself being pretty significantly below consensus on. I think that, I don't know, I'm just not a huge believer in the Giants offense at all. I talked about that a little bit with Saquon Barkley earlier on, where I just think this Giants offense is going to take a step back. Total touchdowns aren't going to really be there. We only saw Daniel Jones throw 17 touchdown passes last season, I believe. How many are really going to go to Darren Waller if they throw, let's just say, be nice and say they throw 20 touchdown passes, then Darren Waller probably catches 5. Maybe has 800 receiving yards, 50, 60 catches. It's just not going to be enough to make him a high-end difference maker at the tight end position. You're going to need like a 10 touchdown outing for him to be a true difference maker, or have him catch 90 passes, and I don't see either one of those things happening this year, so I just can't get behind it. So now we're having to overpay a little bit for Marquise Brown. Team Reynolds has quite a bit of money left. I am not going to force myself to significantly overpay here. Reynolds is just filling out his bench with these wide receivers. He'll be done there, and I'll be able to get guys like Lockett and Brandon Ayuk later, who I think are going to be super solid as well. Don't want to force myself here because I want to be able to get David Montgomery as well. I want to make sure that I still have a good RB3 on the roster, so I wasn't going to overpay and sacrifice that. Given that now we're already to the point where we're drafting for our bench, I want to make sure that I have a little bit more depth. Had Marquise Brown been a guy that was going to go into my starting lineup, I would have been more adamant about it because I obviously want to lean towards prioritizing having a really high-end starting lineup over having a high-end bench, but once my starting lineup's full, once I've got a starting lineup that I'm really satisfied with, I want to do what I can to prioritize building a balanced bench. I want to make sure that I can have depth at both positions, not just one. Cam Akers is another guy that's really interesting. I actually, for $10, he's a perfectly fine RB3. I think he's going to be really solid this year. I think he's got legitimate top 15 potential. He's got Reynolds again. That's totally fine. I just want to make sure I put my name in the hat there because in case David Montgomery gets super outbid, I don't want to find myself in a spot where I'm going to be hurting at running back position there. That's totally fine, though. Not a problem at all. I'm going to still get probably Tyler Lockett, Brandon Ayuk, and David Montgomery. Be my first three players on the bench, and I'll feel good about that. Ken Walker's interesting now that he's just so cheap. Normally he's been going for about $20. Really interesting to see how cheap he is just off of this groin injury news. I don't know what to think about it yet. It's hard for me to really adjust my rankings because Zach Charbonnet is also hurt. With the shoulder injury Zach Charbonnet is dealing with, we were given a no timetable for his return, as to where we were given like a 2-week, 3-week timetable for Kenneth Walker. So Kenneth Walker is going to be fine for week 1, it sounds like, assuming nothing changes there. And we still don't know about Zach Charbonnet. It's really possible that Charbonnet, I don't know, maybe Charbonnet is going to need surgery. Maybe he'll miss a couple weeks. If Charbonnet goes on IR, then suddenly Kenneth Walker is a really high-end draft pick because he's the only running back in Seattle. He's a really talented player. We're not worried about him losing touches. So, really interesting situation there. I'm not willing to move either one of those guys. Well, I'm willing to move Charbonnet down in my rankings because of this, but not really willing to move Ken Walker down just yet because I think that there's still a world that exists where this helps him because you could see him be alone on the field without Charbonnet. So Lockett's guy I really want to grab here. If he can be our wide receiver 4, I think that's really solid. He's just a guy that is really nice to have on your fantasy rosters. He's just a guy you can plug and play any given week. Probably not going to be an elite performer this season just because there's a little bit more target competition, although if the two running backs for Seattle are hurt, then maybe they have to pass even more this year. But Lockett's a really great guy to have on your roster. He's just going to be really nice to have throughout the course of the season. It's really nice to have those guys that you can plug and play and honestly get boom spike performances from as well because he is a really talented player. The upside is certainly there on any given week. Isaiah Pacheco's interesting. I think $8 is about right. He's going in like the 7th round normally in most drafts. I think that's about right. Obviously, Jerick McKinnon's going to steal the pass catching work. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is still there, so I'm worried that Clyde's going to be more involved than he was last season. It could be kind of bumpy for Pacheco, but he's still an involved part of probably the best offense in the NFL, so there's obviously value there. Maybe he gets more involved as a pass catcher as well. I don't think there's any reason to think that he can't do that. He just wasn't used that way last season, so it's possible. The upside's there. I totally understand wanting to grab pieces of the Chiefs offense, but I would much prefer Pacheco be my running back 3 than my running back 2 because I don't really want to depend on him. James Cook's gotten a lot of buzz lately. A report from their offensive coordinator said that they view James Cook as a 3-down running back. I don't know how I feel about it. I just given his size, not just his current size, it's not like he's going to get any bigger. Given his size, I don't really ever see him handling a true 20-touch workload. He might get, I don't know, 13, 14 touches a week, which would be really good for him, but he's not going to get goal line work. Damian Harris is going to come on the field for the goal line work, and honestly, their goal line running back is Josh Allen anyway. On top of that, we're going to see really, maybe it changes this year. Maybe Josh Allen is more willing to dump the ball down to the running back position, but he hasn't historically been willing to do that. And because of that, it really just makes the pass catching role for the Bills kind of worthless because there's just not many passes to be caught by the running back position. If that's the case, it just really makes it hard for James Cook to really be a true value here. So I don't find myself drafting much of him, but obviously he's another player kind of like Pacheco where I don't really know about his role, but he is going to be a part of a really good offense. So I totally get the upside case there, but I just don't find myself drafting too much of him. It's really nice to see Reynolds buying Kamara here. I'm not super in on Kamara right now. I think he's a totally fine pick. It'll be interesting to see what happens with his suspension, but I'm glad to see him spend more of his money so that I can make sure I can really wrap up David Montgomery here. I took a bit of a gamble having bought Brandon Ayuk there because I put myself in a bit of a spot where I've got a max bid of 9 here coming up, so it's going to be a little bit tough to fill out the bench, but If we can get David Montgomery for 5, we're going to feel pretty good about it. With about $2 left for everyone else, and we'll be able to fill out the team that we want here. So now that's my turn to nominate a player. I'm going to nominate another running back. I don't want to nominate one of the high-end guys just yet. Actually, I do. Let's just get Montgomery out of here. Let's make sure we get him on our roster. That's the most important thing right now. I want to make sure we get the guy that we really want. Make sure we get that solid RB3 locked in, a guy that I'm really comfortable with, and then I can focus on building out the rest of the roster. I've talked about Montgomery all off season. The dude's going to have double-digit touchdowns. He's going to have 1,000 total yards. He's got insane upside if something were to happen to Jahmyr Gibbs. He's just, like, if you need to play it like hero RB and draft David Montgomery to be your running back 2, I've got no problem doing that. I think you can start him week 1, start him every single week this season, be really happy with it. He's a better player than people give him credit for. He was honestly always really effective in terms of forcing missed tackles in Chicago. He was just kind of the only good player on the offense for a couple of years. Really tough to succeed when you're facing stacked boxes all the time. But Montgomery's a good player. He got good money from Detroit. They clearly intend to use him. I think we're going to see a lot of situations where Jahmyr Gibbs and Monty are on the field at the same time, and I think both those guys can have really good years. I'm not trying to take anything away from Gibbs when I say Montgomery's going to be good, but I really like Montgomery this season. He's just a screaming value right now. I can't believe he stayed this cheap, and I really hope he stays that way throughout the course of the draft season. Dallas Goedert's another guy I'm in love with this season. I just think he's going to legitimately finish the tight end 3, maybe the tight end 4, but I've got him ranked significantly above consensus. Consensus is the tight end 7 right now. He's just a really good player. I find myself still not drafting too much of him because generally I find myself just really trying to get Mark Andrews. I do basically everything I can to get Mark Andrews in round 3 or at pre-draft value in auction drafts. I think he's just going to be a really solid asset, but he's certainly a good value, Goddard, and I think he's just going to be totally fine. Be a really solid asset this season, and the guy that you're going to want to have on your teams. This is the other part that kind of a bit of a bummer about how all these mock drafts go is it's very rare that you'll get a mock draft room with 11 other people where you actually get all 11 people to stay throughout the entire course of the draft. I totally get it. People are busy. They don't want to sit around and fill out their whole team. But if you're going to do a mock draft, a live one, I do stay around. It really helps make things more realistic. Like, for example, Team Burns here has $81. At this point in a draft, if you've got a league mate that's screwed up and has this much money left, they're going to be forcing any player with a pulse onto their roster. They're going to make sure they get all the best players left. You'll hit a lull where basically you can't buy anyone else. So just keep that in mind. It's a little bit different. You probably will end up with a slightly worse team because the computers are dumb. So any mock draft you're doing, especially on ESPN, I find the computers are just kind of dumb. If you're dealing with that, then just understand that it could be a little bit difficult to get perfect representation of what you're going to be looking at during your drafts. Trevor Lawrence is a guy that I actually think is poised to have a really huge season this season. I fully expect him to take that step forward, be an elite fantasy quarterback this year. He's just a guy that he's got the weapons around him. Everything's in place for him to be a really good player this season. I think it's going to be tough for him to crack the top 5 at the position just because I think honestly the top 5 for me, assuming Burrow is healthy, are really locked in for me with the tier 1 guys and then Herbert and Burrow. So it'll be tough for him to really crack into that, but I do think he's good enough to do it, and he does offer a little bit more on the ground than the guys like Burrow, so he's got the potential to do it. I think that Trevor Lawrence is a perfect target if you miss out on those top-tier guys, and really excited about him this season. Christian Kirk's another guy. I think his role is a lot more secure than people are giving him credit for. He's going to operate out of the slot this season, probably see over 100 targets again, could easily catch 80 passes this season. And if he does that, he's going to be a really solid performer. He was a wide receiver 1 in fantasy football last season, and people are just forgetting about him because of Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley's probably going to be the wide receiver 1 in Jacksonville. I totally get that, but we don't know that for sure. It has been like 2 years since Calvin Ridley played a full football season. Christian Kirk was really good just last season, so you never really know there, but I think Christian Kirk's going to be a locked-in guy that you can play every single week. Kind of like Brandon Ayuk, kind of like Tyler Lockett. I think he fits right into that tier of player where you're going to feel really comfortable playing him any given week. He's going to be like a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3, and I think that just really sets the stage for him to have a really underrated, high-quality season this year. So we're getting to the point in the draft here. We've got a total of $10 left. We've sort of got it down perfectly how we normally like it now. We've got $2 per remaining bench spot, $1 for the kicker and defense. As always, kicker and defense are going to come last. I won't make you guys watch that because who cares? Maybe I'll do a video right towards the end of draft season going over best early season streamers for defenses, just so you guys can take a look at that. But really don't focus too much on the defenses or kickers. It's just going to be a waste of your time. We're not going to draft another quarterback or a tight end because why would we? We've got two really high-end guys, so time to start starring some guys here. I think Antonio Gibson's going to be really good value this season, especially for $2. That's just insane. Jordan Addison's a guy I really like. Gabe Davis is good. Quentin Johnston's great. Zay Flowers is great. Honestly, Brian Robinson for $1, I have no problem with. He's going to be a guy that's going to be completely usable just because of how much volume he's going to get. We'll put Antonio Gibson up here, see if we can get him for $1. It'll be tough to. Normally, it feels like these are the kind of guys that end up going for 2 or 3. And especially in your actual drafts, do note that a lot of these $1 guys, especially the guys that are the first $1 guys, you're going to see them go for a couple more bucks because you're going to have people left in your draft that, they've got a little bit of extra money and it doesn't make there's nothing to save it for because all the good players are gone. So that's another thing where these mock drafts end up being a little bit different. The guys that go for $1, the first tier of $1 guys, you might end up having to pay 2 or 3 for them. Ends up being a little bit different. So just keep that in mind. If you see me get a guy for $1 here, it's not necessarily a perfect representation of proof that you can get them for $1 in your actual drafts. But that is really nice. Having got him for $1, we can now spend up to $3 on a player. Um, Nobody really stands out as a guy that I'd be looking to spend $3 on. I think Jordan Addison would be my highest rated player left on the board. Probably followed by Quentin Johnston and then Gabe Davis. So I'll spend $3 on Addison if I have to. P. Ryan's another guy I'm kind of interested in, but now that I've got Gibson and Montgomery, I feel like I'm pretty set at the running back position. I sort of touched on earlier how I'm pretty comfortable leaving the draft with 4 good running backs. Chubb and Sanders are obviously going to hold down the fort for me here, and then Montgomery and Gibson are perfectly solid. We also have 5 really solid receivers already, though, so we don't necessarily need more of those. So positionally, it doesn't really matter at this point. We'll just try and stay balanced. Probably get 2 more wide receivers, 1 more running back. So probably looking at Addison and Johnston, and then we'll try and get either P. Ryan or Swift is interesting. Penny's interesting as well. Kendre Miller is a little interesting. Obviously, I like guys like Tyler Algier, Elijah Mitchell. That's where we're getting into the handcuff ranges, so a little different. Van Jefferson's even interesting now because who knows what's going to happen with Cooper Kupp. But granted, if Jefferson's the one for that team, I think it's going to be really uphill battle for the Rams this season. Team Reynolds, kind of an interesting approach here. I like sort of showing you guys some of the teams that other people build. If you watched my draft strategy video, this would be what I would sort of call a balanced roster build. He's got really no true studs. His most expensive players are Ramondre Stevenson and Aaron Jones. But he's got a really full roster. He's got a really deep team. I personally find that this is a bad approach to take for a few reasons. In this draft, it actually worked out okay in that he didn't have to deal with anybody else who did this and really bid him up. But you can see scenarios where you do this, you miss the whole top tier of guys, and then you end up overpaying for these middle tier guys, so then you're just paying up for mediocre performance. But on top of that, he put the least amount of money, like he put significantly less money into his starting lineup than I did, for example. And that just means my starting lineup's better. And bench points don't matter, unfortunately. So it really does matter. That obviously, a little bit of depth is helpful. You're going to deal with injuries. You're going to deal with bye weeks. You want to have some of that. But you have to keep in mind that you're going to be able to mix and match waiver wires throughout the course of the season. There will be guys that present themselves in the waiver wire. And first off, say you have this team going into the season, after week 1, who are you going to feel good about dropping? No one. You can't drop anyone on this team. So no matter what presents itself on waivers, you're going to need to see every single player on your bench suck for multiple weeks in a row before you're comfortable dropping him. And that's going to be frustrating because you're going to watch everyone else's teams get better throughout the course of the season while they add guys on waivers, make trades, and you're going to feel stuck with your team. You're going to get to a point where you're going to be hoping that you can trade 2 or 3 of these guys for a guy that's going to improve your starting lineup, and you'll just wish you just and you'll just wish that you started the season by having drafted a better starting lineup in the first place. So it's an interesting roster build. I know it looks kind of good on paper because you've got a lot of names, really quality bench, but like I said, bench points don't matter. Don't focus too much on it. And like I said here, look at my team. I spent way more on my starting lineup than he did, and my bench is still plenty good. Nothing that no need to worry about it. These are plenty of guys that I'm really comfortable playing with if I have to, and I didn't have to sacrifice my starting lineup. So I think this is it's a good um, balanced approach that I took as to where he took a very passive approach to his draft. David Njoku's another guy. I've got him ranked actually as my tight end 5, I believe. His consensus ADP is tight end 9 right now. I just think he's gonna have a lot of really explosive plays this season. He's a guy that he's got the athleticism to put up some spike weeks at the tight end position. I think Deshaun Watson's gonna be a little bit better this year than he was last year. Um, so I like Njoku as a tight end if you want to wait on the position. $2 is perfectly fine. I think he's gonna be really solid this year. Don't find myself drafting a ton of him just because of how much more I like the values of Mark Andrews and Goddard. But if for whatever reason I miss out on both those two guys, I do find myself taking Njoku quite a bit. Or in best ball formats where I find myself drafting obviously more than one tight end. Um, Definitely enjoy taking Njoku on those. So now we're up. Jordan Addison. I'll nominate for 1. Fully expecting to have to pay 3 here. Someone will probably bid 2. Yep. Spend 3. Totally fine. Like I said, we have that extra dollar. That could have been a scenario. Sort of get toward the end of the drafts where it gets a little bit interesting. I could have nominated Jordan Addison for $2, hoping that nobody would have been willing to pay 3. But I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to put myself in a spot where I was going to have to pay 4 for him. I probably would have, and then just been stuck with $1 for one of my bench players. So it probably would have worked out. Not really mattered in the long run, regardless of how I wanted to play that. But just wanted to be safe, make sure I could get Addison there for 3 if I could. So just keep those things in mind. The little dollar here and there, it does matter towards the end of the draft. Obviously, in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to be a huge deal, but all those little things that you could do throughout the course of preseason, draft season, waivers, by trades, all that. Every little thing you could do throughout the course of the season to make your team better is going to add up. And if you just do all the little things right, that stuff will compound throughout the course of a season and make your team better and better. So P. Ryan's probably going to be our last running back here. I think he's a really, really solid running back, like 3, running back 4, especially early on in the season while he's probably operating as the 1A to Javonte's 1B. Obviously, the reports out of camp have been really good for Javonte Williams so far. I believe he's only missed 1 practice so far, and even then he worked out on the sideline. So Javonte Williams honestly seems healthy. He's cleared for contact, which is incredible. So maybe it won't matter. Maybe Javonte's just going to be a stud, and maybe he really can be like that. But I think P. Ryan's a really talented player. They're going to run the ball a lot in Denver this season. Running backs will be involved in the passing game as well. And I think that P. Ryan's honestly just a good player. So I think P. Ryan's a guy that you can start any given week if you have to. And especially in PPR formats, I think he's going to have some value. And he's basically free at $2. So I find myself drafting him quite a bit. So now we've got $2 left to get our last player. Ideally, I will be drafting Quentin Johnston. I end up finding that's like my favorite stack to make right now because I find myself drafting a ton of Justin Herbert, and Quentin Johnston is just so cheap later on that I love drafting Quentin Johnston. I think that really he's probably the cheapest stack you can make with the top tier quarterback that's actually going to matter. Um, I guess maybe you could argue like Joe Burrow and Tyler Boyd as an example that comes to mind. Gabe Davis and Josh Allen is another example. But it's really nice to get a really cheap stack like that because it does give you some significantly higher upside that a lot of your teammates or your league mates might not have. And getting him this low, like I'm obviously never going to be dependent on Quentin Johnston, but he's a guy that by the second half of the season he could truly emerge as a guy that you want to play any given week. And if that's the case, he's going to be a really quality asset. So I think Quentin Johnston's a guy that for $1, he's just a steal right now. I think in most snake drafts, he's going like the 9th or 10th round right now. I like that draft value as well. I find myself drafting him there quite a bit too. And in best ball, I draft him quite a bit as well to go with Justin Herbert whenever I get him. So I think Quentin Johnston's a really quality player. He's showing out in camp. If something happens to Keenan Allen or Mike Williams, which I've talked about it often, something probably will happen to Keenan Allen or Mike Williams. It always seems to. And if that does, then Quentin Johnston's going to be immediately the number 2 target in an offense that's going to be really good this season. So Johnston's a guy I love drafting. The upside's insane, and there's a very real path to him being honestly a top 20 guy this season. So Johnston could easily be one of like my favorite later round, potentially league-winning assets right now. Cole Kmet's a guy that I find is just kind of a wasted draft pick. He did just get a big contract, so the Bears clearly like him, but he's probably the number 4 target in a bad offense. So just don't waste your time. I've talked about it before. I just don't think it's really there. He's a talented player, but it's just going to be a low passing volume offense. He's not going to get many targets. Just don't see value there. Odell is sort of the same thing. He's got one foot out the door. He said this is going to be his last season in the NFL. He just fleeced the Ravens. He got $18 million. It's been 2 years since he's played meaningful football. He's probably the number 4 target on the Ravens. They're going to be probably a low passing volume offense anyway. Just avoid Odell. Waste of a draft pick as well. Tua is interesting. I think Tua legitimately could be a top 10 quarterback this season. I think honestly, like top 8 is in his range of outcomes if things go right. The concerns obviously the concussions, but the assets around him are just so elite. Obviously, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are probably the best wide receiver duo in the NFL. I guess you could make arguments for Chase and Higgins or AJ Brown and Devonta Smith, but um, regardless, it's a very elite set of weapons he's got to work with. And if they're all healthy and Tua's healthy, he's clearly going to be an elite fantasy quarterback. That's just going to be a team that's going to score too many points for him to not really perform. Also, there's no real strong running game in Miami, so there's not too much risk of them pillaging yardage or touchdowns from him. So I think that Tua is a guy that if you wait on the quarterback position, he could certainly be a guy that you probably want to double up. You probably want to pair him with Kirk Cousins or something. Maybe pair him with like a Russell Wilson late. Aaron Rodgers late, Geno Smith late, something like that. You don't want to leave your draft with just Tua because of the risks associated with it, but Tua could be a really solid performer for you if you need him. So if you want to draft Tua, I've got no problem with that, especially if you wait on the quarterback position. And now we're up. We get to nominate our player. I will be nominating him for the full $2 because I want to make sure that we get him. I think that Quentin Johnston, I talked about him a lot. He's just a really solid asset. We'll have that $1 left for our kicker and defense, and obviously I'm not going to make you guys sit through that. So, assuming we get Quentin Johnston here, I really like how our team panned out. I think we've got a really rock solid starting lineup with 2 probably top 12 running backs, 2 probably top 12 wide receivers, a top 5 quarterback, a top 2 tight end, and then a lot of really quality flex options. So I'd honestly give this team like an A minus or an A. I would be ecstatic if I could leave any of my drafts with this team. I think this is going to be a team that's honestly I would be expecting to win the league with it, or at least make the playoffs with it. And obviously you can never expect to win your league given how tough it is, but um, I would feel like I'm a legitimate contender with this team. I'd be really ecstatic after the draft. So to summarize, our quarterback here is Justin Herbert. Our 2 starting running backs are Nick Chubb and Miles Sanders. Our 2 starting wide receivers are CeeDee Lamb and Chris Olave. Our starting tight end is Mark Andrews. Our flex is Terry McLaurin. Off the bench at the wide receiver position, we've got Tyler Lockett, Brandon Ayuk, Jordan Addison, and Quentin Johnston. And off the bench at the running back position, we've got David Montgomery, Antonio Gibson, and Samaje Perine. So no real holes there. We've got real solid running backs, even off of the bench. 3 running backs off the bench that I'm comfortable with. We've got 4 wide receivers off the bench that I'm comfortable with, and a really rock solid starting lineup. So I actually really like this team. This might have been one of my favorite mocks so far this season. I think it probably turned out one of the best, and really like it. So if you made it this far in the video, thank you guys so much for watching. I know it's a long video. These mock drafts tend to be. I think you guys like them, though. I hope that you guys are learning a little bit. I hope I can really share some insight into my draft thought process as well. So let me know what you thought of the team. Let me know if you thought I made any mistakes, anything where I could have done better. If you want other video requests or whatever, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'll try and get to all those. I'm trying to put out a video every single day, so could probably get around any video requests you guys have. If you have any questions about anything, feel free to let me know. Happy to talk to you guys in the comments and stuff with all that. So If it's your first time on the channel as well, thank you for stopping by. I would love it if you'd subscribe to the channel. We're really going pretty fast right now. We broke 500 subscribers. It's super exciting. We're at like 530 right now, so we really blew right past it. Maybe we can hit 1,000 by the start of the NFL season. I know that would be crazy, but it would be super cool to try. So let's see if we can get there. So do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and like the video as well. It really helps the algorithm. Really helps me know that you like the videos. Helps me know that you guys want more of them. So yeah, thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch the video, and I'll catch you next time. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.